In the 18th century, one empire ruled much of the world. The British Empire had the strongest navy on Earth. Its trade network stretched across continents, and its army had defeated powerful rivals in Europe and beyond. On the other side of the Atlantic Ocean were 13 colonies. They had no professional army, very little money, and no navy capable of fighting Britain. Yet within only 8 years, these colonies forced the British Empire to accept their independence. This was the birth of a new nation, the United States. But the real question is not just what happened. The real question is how something so unlikely actually happened. How did farmers, blacksmiths, merchants, and local militias defeat the most powerful empire in the world? To understand that, we have to go back to a time when these colonies were still loyal to Britain. Before the Revolution, the American colonies were part of the British Empire. There were 13 British colonies along the eastern coast of North America. Each colony had its own government, economy, and society. Most colonists considered themselves loyal British subjects. They traded with Britain, used British currency, and followed British laws. However, life in the colonies was different from life in Europe. Land was abundant. Many families owned farms. Local governments had significant independence. Over time, colonists developed a strong sense of self-rule. This independence would later become very important. For decades, Britain mostly allowed the colonies to manage their own affairs. But everything began to change after a major global conflict. From 1756 to 1763, Britain fought France in a massive global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. The war took place in Europe, North America, Africa, and Asia. In North America, British forces and colonial militias fought French troops and their Native American allies. Britain eventually won the war and gained huge territories. But victory came at a very high cost. The British government accumulated enormous debt. To solve this financial problem, British leaders believed the American colonies should help pay for the war that had defended them. So Parliament introduced new taxes. These taxes would spark a political crisis that changed history. In 1765, Britain passed a law known as the Stamp Act. This law required colonists to pay taxes on printed materials such as newspapers, legal documents, and playing cards. From Britain's perspective, the tax was reasonable. But many colonists strongly disagreed. They argued that the British Parliament had no right to tax them because the colonies had no representatives in Parliament. This disagreement created a powerful political slogan: "No taxation without representation." Protests began spreading across the colonies. Merchants organized boycotts of British goods. Crowds intimidated tax collectors. Eventually, the pressure forced Britain to repeal the Stamp Act. But the conflict did not end. More taxes followed. Tensions continued to rise. By the early 1770s, relations between Britain and the colonies were deteriorating rapidly. In 1773, Britain passed the Tea Act, which allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies. Many colonists believed this law was another attempt to force them to accept taxation. In the city of Boston, protesters decided to take dramatic action. One night, colonists boarded British ships and dumped large shipments of tea into the harbor. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. The British government reacted with anger. Parliament passed punitive laws known as the Coercive Acts, which punished Massachusetts and increased military control. Instead of isolating the colony, these actions united the colonies. In 1774, representatives from 12 colonies gathered in the First Continental Congress. For the first time, the colonies coordinated resistance together. War was now becoming increasingly likely. The conflict finally erupted in 1775. British troops marched toward the towns of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. Their mission was to seize weapons stored by colonial militias. However, colonial forces were ready. At Lexington, the first shots of the war were fired. Soon after, fighting spread across the region. The colonies quickly formed a unified military force known as the Continental Army. They appointed George Washington as commander. Washington faced enormous challenges. His army was poorly trained and lacked supplies. Many soldiers did not even have proper shoes or uniforms. In contrast, the British Army was one of the most experienced forces in the world. At times, the American cause seemed close to collapse, but one major victory would change everything. In 1777, British forces launched a campaign to divide the colonies. Their plan was to control the Hudson River and separate New England from the rest of the colonies. However, American forces successfully stopped the British advance at the Battle of Saratoga. The British Army was forced to surrender. This victory had enormous consequences. It convinced France that the Americans might actually win the war. France soon entered the conflict as an ally of the colonies. French assistance included soldiers, weapons, money, and naval support. This transformed the war into a global conflict between major powers. By 1781, the war had moved to the southern colonies. British forces under General Cornwallis positioned themselves at Yorktown, Virginia. Washington recognized an opportunity. American forces marched south, while the French Navy blocked British escape routes by sea. Together, American and French troops surrounded the British Army. This event became known as the Siege of Yorktown. After weeks of bombardment, the British Army surrendered. Although fighting continued in small areas, Yorktown effectively ended the war. In 1783, Britain formally recognized American independence in the Treaty of Paris, 1783. The 13 colonies had become the United States of America. The revolution shocked the world. A group of colonies had successfully challenged one of the greatest empires of the time. Even more importantly, the revolution introduced a new political idea: a nation governed by its citizens. This idea would inspire revolutions and democratic movements around the world. The American victory was not inevitable. It depended on leadership, determination, foreign alliances, and the strategic mistakes of a powerful empire. But the revolution created something far greater than independence. It marked the beginning of a nation that, over the next 2 centuries, would grow into one of the most influential powers in world history. And this was only the beginning of America's story. Do you think the American colonies could have defeated Britain without French support? Share your thoughts in the comments. Please subscribe if you want to see us again,